Mortar and pestle. I ground spices with a mortar and pestle. How does one mill spices? I use a mortar and pestle. Blender. I made a smoothie in my blender. How does one prepare a smoothie? I use a blender. Food processor. I chop the vegetables in a food processor. How do you cut vegetables quickly? I use a food processor. Salad spinner. I dried the lettuce using a salad spinner. How does one dry lettuce? I use a salad spinner. Pastry brush. I used a pastry brush to apply butter to the pastry. How do you brush butter onto pastry? I use a pastry brush. Skimmer. To remove the foam from the soup, I used a skimmer. How does one eliminate froth from soup? I use a skimmer. Meat thermometers. I used a meat thermometer to check the roast's temperature. How do you check the temperature of meat? I use a meat thermometer. Tart pan. I cook the pie in a tart pan. How do you prepare a tart? I cook in a tart pan. Dutch oven. I cook the beef in a Dutch oven. How do you braise meat? I cook in a Dutch oven. Baking sheet. I cook cookies on a baking sheet. How do you bake cookies? I use a baking sheet. Cake stand. I arrange the cake on a cake stand for show. How does one showcase a cake? I use a cake stand. Pastry cutter. I used a pastry cutter to cut butter into the flour. How does one cut butter into flour? I use a pastry cutter. Egg slicer. I sliced the boiled eggs with an egg slicer. How do you slice boiled eggs? I use an egg slicer. Mandolin slicer. I used a mandolin slicer to thinly slice the vegetables. How does one thinly slice vegetables? I use a mandolin slicer. Toaster. I toasted some bread in the toaster. How does one toast bread? I use a toaster. An ice cream scoop. I scooped ice cream using an ice cream scoop. How do you scoop your ice cream? I utilize an ice cream scoop. Funnel. I used a funnel to transfer liquid to a bottle. How does one pour liquid into a bottle? I use a funnel. Meat tenderizer. I used a meat tenderizer to make the steak more tender. How do you tenderize a steak? I use a beef tenderizer. Grill pan. I cook the vegetables using a grill pan. How can you grill vegetables indoors? I use a grilling pan. A slotted spoon. I used a slotted spoon to extract the boiled eggs. How should you remove boiled eggs from water? I utilize a slotted spoon.